Knock knock. Who's there?
A Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher, as well as the second Russian Hurricane in 4 days that had been striking defense force positions in the Pokrovsk direction, were spectacularly destroyed by border guards using FPV drones. The soldiers note that on this section of the front, the enemy tries to hide their equipment and only sends small infantry groups forward, whose goal is to reach the staging points and then proceed to a larger scale assault. But the occupiers are not succeeding. They are eliminated by UAV operators.
Usually it's personnel. They keep coming, constantly, just non-stop. Personnel cover positions. We very rarely see any equipment.
One assault group eliminated 3 crews of Russian drone operators as well as an MLRS. Ukrainian artillerymen reported on their work. The Gods of War from the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade took 3rd place among all combined arms brigades for enemy losses inflicted in August.
Our guns work in rain, snow, heat, and hail, day and night, when the crew no longer has the strength to carry a 10 or 50 kilogram shell, when an enemy drone buzzes nearby, when everything around is burning, and important men in suits are making speeches about deals. The guns are working and will keep working until the last occupier is gone, because the front relies on them. From a statement by the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade, named after the Knights of the Winter campaign on Facebook.
Sharp indeed. It is truly impressive and quite remarkable.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled 26 attempts by the Russians to push the defenders from their position since the beginning of the day. Another 15 assault actions by Russian troops were thwarted in the Novopavlivka sector.
He boasted, Putin to President Trump, that they needed 60 days to resolve almost all the issues of the so-called special military operation. The 60 days ended on September 2nd, already more than a week ago. Now there's a new deadline. You know, it's actually funny to listen to this. It's a little sad, but it's funny. Everything is going according to plan for them. Everything is proceeding according to the timelines they've set. It's just that the deadlines keep changing all the time.
Ukrainian defense forces repelled 9 more Russian attacks in the North Slobodansky and Kursk directions. Ukrainian soldiers showed how they repelled a Russian assault in the Sumy region. The defenders note that it doesn't matter how many drones are used. The main thing is to cover their infantry and prevent the enemy from reaching their positions.
They operated exclusively with drones as intensively as possible to stop the advance of the assault groups. Additionally, remote mining played its part. This slowed down the enemy and caused them additional losses. The assault was repelled. All that was left for our forces was to finish clearing the grove. From a report by the Battalion of Unmanned Aerial Systems of the Pentagon, 225th Separate Assault Regiment of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, on Telegram.
In addition, on the Lyman axis, defenders repelled 8 Russian attacks, 7 near Toretsk, 6 each in the southern Slobodansky and Siversk sectors, 3 each in the Kupiansk and Kramatorsk areas, 2 in the Pridneprovsky sector, and 1 Russian assault was repelled each in the Huliai-Pol and Orikhiv directions.
Every day we make progress and look for new ways to destroy the enemy.
Russia has lost another 990 soldiers in the war against Ukraine over the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army have already exceeded 1,091,000 military personnel. In addition, over the past day, the defense forces destroyed 3 tanks, 1 armored combat vehicle, 29 artillery systems, 1 multiple rocket launcher, as well as 83 units of enemy automotive and special equipment.
Joining our broadcast is military analyst Alexei Geitman. Alexei, good evening. We're glad to welcome you live on Freedom TV channel.
Good evening to you. Glad to see you.
Alexei, of course, today we want to talk about the attack by Russian drones and missiles on Poland, but first, let's at least briefly discuss the situation on various fronts. The Russian army is trying to advance in the Kharkiv region, as well as in the Lyman and Siversk directions, in the area of Dobropilia and Pokrovsk, but their efforts there are futile. However, near Pokrovsk, the occupiers are amassing infantry. This is reported by the American Institute for the Study of War. According to your information, what is the situation, first of all, on these eastern fronts?
Well, there are 3 directions where we expect the offensive to intensify. And the Russians, well, they don't really hide the fact that they're planning something quite serious. For this fall, although it's unclear on what basis they draw such conclusions that they'll be able to achieve something, any results, because the number of forces and resources they have on the front line hasn't changed. According to our main intelligence directorate, it's still about 700,000, just as it was before. That is, we are destroying about as many as the Russians can mobilize in a month in various ways, through contracts, through prisoners, and so on. So it's unclear why they conclude that they'll be able to make any significant advances anywhere. There are three directions where we expect and observe a concentration. This is the Kupiansk direction. Well, you could combine Kupiansk and Lyman because the distance between them is small. They can move troops from Kupiansk to Lyman quite quickly, so you could consider them as one. And naturally, the southern direction is the Zaporizhzhia direction, and then there's the Pokrovsk direction. As they say, that's a given. A month ago, Commander Sirsky said that more than 111,000 troops were concentrated there. He gave a rather precise figure. There is an assessment that now there are even more. They are bringing in additional forces there, including Marines and paratroopers. In other words, these are more or less elite Russian units, not just groups made up of freshly mobilized people. So yes, most likely equipment will be used there. Not necessarily only heavy equipment, besides planes, drones, artillery shelling, and KABs. Everything we are seeing now is an attack or attacks if they do happen there. And unfortunately, it is very likely that they will. These won't just be small assault groups, small like they are now. These will be larger units. There will be equipment, light vehicles, motorcycles, buggies, just like they planned in Dobropilia. Well, they trained for it, carried out these kinds of rapid assaults, and it was easy for them. Armored vehicles, IFVs, APCs, and possibly even heavy tanks, various types, whatever they are gathering there. There are many reasons to draw such conclusions, but let's name at least one which, as they say, makes it unnecessary to mention the others. They are bringing in a sufficient amount of fuel and lubricants there, which, well, is not just for infantry groups. What do they have to lubricate there? They don't really need it, but for vehicles, yes. Even for light vehicles, even for motorcycles and buggies. That's why an offensive on Pokrovsk is expected. Another one. Although they've been trying to enter Pokrovsk for a year and a half now, so far they haven't succeeded. But now they're announcing that they'll manage to carry out this offensive operation. It will be Pokrovsk, it will be Myrnograd, it will be Konstantinovka. Those are the places they plan to capture these settlements. Even Putin talked about this, that he needs this. He decided to resolve this issue by the end of the year. It was until September 2nd. September. We remember on June 2nd and 3rd he was boasting. Putin told President Trump that he needed 60 days to resolve almost all the issues. The so-called special military operation. The 60 days ended on the 2nd. Since September, it's already been more than a week. Now there's a new deadline. You know, it's even funny to hear them. It's a little sad, but it's funny. Everything is going according to their plan. Everything is on the timeline they've set. It's just that the deadlines keep changing all the time. I'm not even talking about the 2-3 days they used to mention. I won't even bring up the references to reports from the Russian General Staff about what needed 2 to 3 months. And all of this, they'll solve all the issues. That is, the September 2nd deadline has already passed. The 2 to 3 months should have ended somewhere in October. And now the new deadline is the end of the year. Well, you know, they're already preparing a third, well, not just a third, there are already 103 deadlines. There's already this subtle information being leaked from various Russian sources saying that their most successful operations for the Russians happen in winter and that this winter they'll definitely show everyone. So they still haven't, I don't want to use that word about, I don't want to, let's bleep it out. They still haven't, let's put it this way, still haven't botched their autumn operation, but they're already preparing excuses for why it never worked out. And they're slowly starting to shape public opinion, maybe inside the Russian Federation, maybe for Europeans, for Americans, that this winter they'll show everyone everything. What does this mean? It means they're not planning to sign any peace agreement. They have no intention of making any agreements with us.
Yes, autumn hasn't even passed or started yet, and they're already talking about winter. Alexei, I want to draw our viewers' attention right now. This is an infographic from the Sint Oryx project. Please take a look, dear viewers. I'm very glad that this is from 2022. You see, dear friends, pink, yellow is the summer of 2023, blue is the summer of 2024. And then, let's say, Ukrainian emerald turquoise, summer of 2025. What is this infographic about? In the summer of 2025, Russia was losing 2 to 3 times less equipment than during the summer months of the first 3 years of the war. The number of destroyed and captured pieces of equipment, you can see it on your screens. I'll also add this because it provides useful context. What does this include? Armored fighting vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, airborne combat vehicles, armored personnel carriers, multi-purpose transporters, other types, the vehicle category, which also includes trucks and armored cars. Well, as we can see, yes, dear friends, turquoise, you see the 4th column. There is still something to compare after all. The highest number was in the summer of 24. That's what was lost by the Russian Federation Army. Yes, this infographic from Siversk just came out the other day. Let me remind our viewers once again. Alexei, well, here's what I want to ask you. There is an opinion among your colleagues, the military experts. I don't know if you agree with it. I'm just curious to ask you, because it's actually quite an interesting theory, that it's not just that they used less, but rather that they're preparing for what you mentioned, a major offensive, but not even in the fall, more likely closer to the cold season. Are there any other reasons today, besides the numbers, to say that the Russians have such capabilities and resources?
Yes. They have, I can't give you the exact number right now, but as far as I remember, about 3,000 tanks that they can't deploy in offensive operations along the entire front line. They've lost a significant amount of equipment there. Well, you know, to be honest, I haven't even paid attention to who is providing this information, this kind of information. The way information is sometimes presented by our partners or by some quite reputable publishers, it causes, you know, irritation. At this point, you know, it's irritation bordering on contempt. Well, I've stopped counting. Information is presented just for the sake of presenting it, but it's not specified, not analyzed, and not explained. But information was presented, for example, up until now. These were, as we discussed with you, remember, in the first half of 25. In 1925, in the first half of the year, Russians mobilized an additional 150,000. And so everyone thought, wow, the army is growing and so on. But then it turned out that 150,000 is just 25,000 per month over 6 months. And before that, they were mobilizing 35,000 per month. That's 120,000 less. But how is the information presented? Now, the amount of equipment they're losing on the battlefield has decreased. Wait a minute. We've started to destroy less equipment. But why have we started destroying less? Is it really impossible to give a comment to explain? They've started to destroy, to lose less. Russia has less equipment now because they've practically stopped using it. Here are this many combat engagements. Here are comparisons with, for example, last year. You can even take the average, like what it was approximately, or rather on average. There was this number of combat engagements. Roughly this amount of equipment participated in these combat engagements. We know the number destroyed. About 80% of the equipment, at least tanks, are destroyed as soon as they enter the battlefield by our anti-tank weapons. Has this number decreased? Were we destroying 4 out of 5 tanks? Has this percentage decreased? So are we now destroying 2 out of 5 tanks and 3 keep going, or just 1 and 4 keep going? No, we're still destroying them just the same. 4 tanks out of 5. It's just that if 50 tanks came, we would destroy 40 of them right away. The other 10 would flee without looking back. And the number, yes, 40 tanks destroyed. And when there were 5 tanks coming, we still destroyed 80%. We destroyed 4 tanks. But the information is being presented as if we're destroying fewer tanks now, and Russia is losing less heavy equipment. They're losing less because they're sending out fewer vehicles. Why isn't the information presented this way? But the way it's being presented, as you, well, not you personally, but the way this publication presents the information, people are left with the impression that, well, that they've learned something, that they've somehow adapted. Look, they're losing less equipment now, much less. So they're losing less because, you know, they might also be losing fewer soldiers. They could even stop losing soldiers altogether. If they just stopped fighting, there wouldn't be any losses at all in the Russian army, except maybe from drinking somewhere in the rear. What is that supposed to mean? How is that even possible? You know, it doesn't even make me angry. Again, it's just irritating, along with a rather negative attitude towards those people who provide information. They present it truthfully. They say it's not the truth, but they don't comment on it. So why has it decreased, at least to some extent? Because they've started using this equipment less. Yes, are they preparing or not? I'll answer directly. Of course they are preparing. We just mentioned this a moment ago, that it really has increased. We can see it. The amount of fuel and lubricants is being brought up to the front line. That's why we're destroying their logistics. We're destroying trains. We're destroying fuel factories. All of this, yes, it's reasonable to assume that they want to use this equipment. But to present information like this, well, you know, it's fucking evil. Well, honestly. Well, what exactly is this object that we are looking at?
Alexei, let's talk, about using them. This is this flying technology, but already in Poland. Last night, Russia attacked not only Ukraine with drones, but also neighboring Poland, 24. Russian drones crossed the airspace of a NATO member country. The Polish command raised planes into the air. Fighter aircraft from Poland's allies in the alliance also joined the operation. Ground-based air defense and radar reconnaissance systems were brought to the highest level of readiness. I will add that Poland is due to Russian drones. 3 airports, including 2 in Warsaw, suspended their operations. How do you assess what actually happened in Polish airspace? After all, there are different opinions. The Russians, of course, immediately rushed. Right away, they started making excuses, saying that they had absolutely nothing to do with it. They claim it was Ukrainian electronic warfare, that it was the Ukrainians who directed their drones into Polish territory. The only thing is, it's unclear how these drones were flying in from Belarusian territory, which in fact the Polish side stated almost immediately early in the morning. Do you think NATO's response to everything that happened was sufficient? And by the way, an important factor that the BBC pointed out is that if we talk about the percentage of targets shot down by Ukrainian air defense forces in today's attack, it's 93% out of 415 aerial targets. But as for the Polish and NATO allies, only 4 out of 19. How exactly would you comment on that particular point or aspect?
There is a lot of discussion about how much we actually... I got distracted, if you noticed. I just opened resolution 33.14, well, to talk a bit about Tusk, about Poland's reaction, about Article 4, but that's a separate topic. I think we'll have a couple of minutes for that later. They scrambled their jets, even though we had already F-16s, even F-35s flew in there. In order to chase after Shaheds, we already know that these are ineffective methods. There's a difference in the minimum speed of the aircraft. Even the F-16, not to mention the F-35, exceeds the speed of a Shahed, especially if it's flying not at its maximum but at an average speed. The pilot's reaction time to attack it with a missile or a machine gun was calculated to be less than 1 second, 0.8 seconds. But not every pilot will be able to react in time. And besides, to attack a Shahed, if we're talking about machine guns, that's from a distance of several hundred meters. The debris from a Shahed explosion can damage the plane, especially if it's on a tail chase course. On a head-on course, there's no chance at all. Their even fractions of a second aren't enough. That's why they scrambled the planes. I rarely hear that planes were scrambled. There's practically no point in trying to shoot down a Shahed with planes.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukrainian all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.